Hello, in this video I'm going to explain 4 ways to focus stack a set of images. And if you're not familiar with focus stacking, then it's a really simple technique. All you have to do is use a tripod and take a series of frames while adjusting the focus point. So you can see here in my first frame, the focus point is right on the tip of the closest point, which is this little part of the flower here. If we move down to the next frame, now the focus point is somewhere around about here. So I'm shifting the focus point backwards in each frame. If we go back one more, then you can see this area at the back of the flower is sharp. If we go back one more, you can see now the stem is sharp. So I've captured sharpness across the entire subject. Now what I can do is merge all 4 frames into a single image with front to back sharpness, which is something that wouldn't have been possible with a single frame. So let's get started. We need to open all 4 images here as a stack within Photoshop. And we could open them all manually, then copy and paste one on top of the other, but there's a much simpler and quicker way to do this using Bridge. We can just highlight the first one there. We scroll down to the bottom one, hold shift and click on that so that we have all 4 images selected. Then we can go to Tools, Photoshop and load files into Photoshop layers. And after a few seconds, my images will load into Photoshop. And if I bring up the layers panel here by going to Window, Layers, you can see there are my 4 images stacked on top of one another. Now we can start blending them together, but you might have noticed before we do that there's a slight misalignment between the frames. That's caused by the change in focus point. So you can see the subject gets very slightly larger in each image. So before we can blend them, we need to align them. To do this, we can hold shift and click from the top frame there to the bottom to select all 4 images in the stack, and then we can go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. And we can just leave it set to auto and hit OK. And now if we toggle those layers off and on again, you can see the alignment is much better. So I think at this point we're ready to blend them. Now you can see all 4 layers are still highlighted here in the layers panel, so I can go to the next auto feature we're going to use, which is Edit Auto Blend Layers. And we can set this to stack images, we can check seamless tones and colors, and we can content aware fill and then hit OK. And after a few seconds, the result is a single sharp layer. There's a merged copy of all of these layers below, and if we take a look at each individual layer here, we can see what's going on. So you can see the layer masks corresponding to each layer are only revealing these little white parts. So these are the sharp parts on that lowest layer. If we go through, you can see more and more sharp areas are gradually added until we come up with our single sharp layer. And if we zoom in a little closer, you can see how we now have a sharp subject front to back. And we could perhaps finish off by going to the camera raw filter here under the filter menu, and let's perhaps just grab the radial filter tool, dial in some negative exposure and add a nice circular vignette like that. We could also just perhaps up the exposure and contrast and the vibrance, saturation. And I'm happy with that. So that's how you can blend images using the auto align and auto blend feature. Now let's take a look at another set of images here. This time I've got 6 frames that I'd like to blend together. So again, I'll highlight them all here in Adobe Bridge and go to Tools, Photoshop, Load Files into Photoshop Layers. And once more, we'll start off by using the auto feature, so we'll highlight all 7 layers and again go to Edit, Auto Align Layers first. And then we can go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers. And again, you can see Photoshop has merged all of these sharp parts here and added these layer masks. On the face of it, it looks like it's done a pretty good job, but if we zoom in a little closer here, you can see that around the edges of all these fine details here, it's looking really blotchy and actually not that good at all. So we're going to need to tidy things up manually here. Now to do this, we need to find the sharp part that we're missing. So I need to find the area of the image here behind these yellow buds that appears sharp. And to do this, I can go back into Bridge and scroll through each layer here to find the sharp part. And in fact, I think it might be one of these two layers here. So I'm going to just zoom into this area here. And I can see that in my final frame here, that's the sharpest section of the background image there. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop now, find that layer there that corresponds to that particular image, which is this bottom one here, and I'm going to duplicate it with Command or Control and J to create a copy. Then I'm going to drag that copy to the top of the stack, or I can use a keyboard shortcut. That's quite a handy one. We can hold Command or Control Shift and the right bracket key, and that will stick that layer right on top of the stack. And I'm also going to delete the layer mask. So I'll right click the layer mask thumbnail there and choose Delete Layer Mask. So now you can see, if I toggle that layer off and on, how this area of the background is appearing sharper on that layer. But of course we need to hide everything but that sharp part. And to do this, we can use another great auto feature to seek out the sharper parts of the image. If we go to Select and Focus Area, this command will try and pick up all the sharper parts. So we can adjust the in focus range like this until we pick up as much of that sharp background as we can, while excluding the yellow parts of the flower. And then we can go into Select and Mask to tidy it up. So once in Select and Mask, we can grab the Refine Radius tool if we like and just paint over these areas here to try and exclude them from the selection, and then work around the rest of the image. And the great thing about Select and Mask is we can also go and grab the Quick Selection tool from the Tools panel up here, and we can paint to subtract areas that we don't want. So I can hold Alt and paint to subtract this part up here to exclude it from my selection. And then switch back to the Refine Radius tool and tidy up the edge just by painting along it to increase the area of refinement along all these soft edges like this. And once I know I've got a pretty decent selection of all the sharp parts on that layer, I can choose to output down here to a layer mask and hit OK. And now if we zoom in again to that area that was blotchy before, if we toggle that layer off and on, you can see that was my image after we merged using the auto blend feature. And then by adding that extra layer, you can see we've managed to come up with a much better result around these parts of the frame by adding in those extra sharp parts that the auto blend feature missed out. And you can continue doing that for other parts of the image if you like, but I think I'll leave it there. And of course, if you wanted to, you could use the focus area feature to blend an entire set manually in this way. Now let's look at another way in which we can stack the sharper parts of an image. So again, I'm going to open these 4 images here as a stack by going to Tools, Photoshop Load Files, into Photoshop Layers. Now this time we'll try blending all of our layers manually. First of all, again, we'll use the Auto Align feature just to make sure that they're all lined up properly. And then we're going to paint some simple layer masks. So I'm going to hide all but the bottom layer there. And if we zoom in a little closer, you can see on the lowest layer, this top part of the bud is sharp. If we turn on the layer above, you can see now the sharp part comes around here. So what I'm going to do is highlight that layer above and then hold Alt and click the Add Layer Mask icon here at the bottom of the Layers panel to add a full mask, and that completely hides everything on that layer there. But if we grab the Brush tool, set our foreground color to white, and we'll also make sure our brush hardness is right down to 0 by right clicking there, then we can use the left and right square bracket keys on our keyboard to resize the brush tip, and we can just paint in over the areas that we know to be sharper on that upper layer. So I know these areas around here are going to be sharper, so I'll just paint to add them in manually like this. Now if I toggle that layer off and on again, you can see how we can gradually add in the sharp areas. And if we highlight and reveal the layer above, and again toggle it on or off just to check to see which areas are sharper on that upper layer. Again, we can alt click the add mask icon to hide it, paint with white to reveal the sharper parts like this. So we're gradually just adding more and more sharp parts manually. If we highlight the top layer and again reveal it, again we can see on this layer that the very tip of the bud there is sharp. So again we can add a mask and then paint with white like this. So now you can see by painting a few quick masks we can actually focus stack manually in this way. Now I want to show you one final set of images here in Bridge. And again, this time we'll start off by trying to blend these 9 frames here using Photoshop. So we'll go to Tools, Photoshop, and again load files into Photoshop layers. And again, let's try auto aligning and auto blending. And once blended, you can see again on the face of it, it looks like the feature has done a really good job. But if we zoom in a little closer, we start to see some really nasty areas of softness around here like this. So there are limitations to using the auto blend feature within Photoshop. And if you're really keen on focus stacking, it might be worth looking at different options. And there are some really good focus stacking software out there, including Helicon Focus. So this is the Helicon Focus interface here. And we start by loading in a set of images. We can click this little icon here. And again, we can load that same set of 9 files. There are a few options over to the right over here. We can choose a rendering method. And I find B or C usually works quite well. And from experimenting with this particular set of images, I find that C works best here. And then all we need to do is click render and see what we get. And after a few seconds, you can see we now have a much sharper image. And if we just move around it, you can see that we're not getting those soft areas that we got with our Photoshop blend. And if we like, we can move on to the retouching and the text tabs there, and then we can save the image when we're happy. So the main advantage Helicon Focus has over Photoshop is accuracy, particularly in more detailed images. And if you find that you're really getting into focus stacking, then it's well worth checking out. You can get a 30-day free trial from the website. And if you decide to buy, you can go for a yearly license for $30, or you can get an unlimited license for $115. So there we have it. That's a few different focus stacking techniques to try out that allow you to extend depth of field beyond the limits of your camera.